Hello to you. I do hope you're well. Welcome to this OCR A-Level Religious Studies video. I'm Ben Wardle, and today we are discussing how to secure 40 out of 40 in your essays. So what do we need to do in order to secure an A star? So we're going to talk through your AO1 as well as your AO2 and think about how we can maximize our chances of securing the top marks in this A-level. So let's just start with what I call my A-star essentials. So these are the things you need to do and you need to include in your essays in order to secure an A-star. And remember, that means that you are securing 37, 38, 39, or 40 out of 40 in all of your essays. So my top tips are that you always answer the exact question. It's really important that you read that question and then your entire essay is focused on answering that exact question. You cannot just see that it's about religious experiences and then just write everything you know about the topic. Every single paragraph has to be completely focused on answering the question that is set. My next tip is that you actually attack the question. So don't sit on the fence and give a really neutral account of all the different scholars involved. Make sure that you are shaping your essay around a thesis statement. So we're going to start with a really clear thesis statement, and we're actually going to attack that question. You're going to have a brilliant critical tone, you're going to engage in critical analysis, and then you're going to make a really clear conclusion at the end of your essay. And then my third top tip here, and this brings those two together, is that you refer back to the question throughout your essay. So every paragraph needs to be using the language of the question and it needs to be referring back to the question. So if we just break this down in terms of what you need to tick off in each of your essays in order to secure the top marks, you need to make sure you start with a strong and clear introduction that sets out the thesis statement. So you need to be very clear in your first paragraph what conclusion you're going to reach in your final paragraph. You need to, of course, make sure you're referring to scholars in every paragraph that you write. You need to give clear and concise explanations of their ideas. You need to use examples to illustrate them. For example, when you're talking about religious experiences, make sure you're mentioning St. Paul. When you are referencing something, make sure you say where you've got it from. Make sure you're saying, if you're talking about Christianity, for example, that this is a teaching from the Bible. Or if you're talking about Aristotle, say that he wrote about it in his Nicomachean Ethics. You need to make sure you're comparing ideas as well. And that is a great way to get your AO2 marks. So make sure you are comparing different scholars and what they've said. And then you're making that critical judgment as to who you think has got the more convincing and coherent argument. Make sure you're engaging in critical analysis. And this is so important that I'm actually going to highlight it because it's not good enough, frankly, if I can put it like that, if you just state what scholars have said. That is not going to get you any higher than really a C grade. In order to get those top marks, you need to be making judgments. And that's what we call critical analysis. So you need to be saying, James is right to assert, or you need to be saying, this argument is fatally flawed because. So make sure your essay has got that critical tone and that you're engaging in that critical analysis. And that is where you're making judgments as to whether what a scholar has said is a strong argument or it's a weak argument. As part of that, then, you need to be making evaluative judgments. So, as I say, you can't just be presenting both sides of the argument. You are here to attack the question, which means you need to make evaluative judgments, not just in your conclusion at the end, but throughout your essay. So make sure, as I say, it's got that critical tone and you're making those evaluative judgments. And then finally, but very importantly, make sure you end with a strong and clear conclusion that sets out a well-justified judgment. And of course, that is going to link to the thesis statement you started out with at the beginning of your essay. So there is my checklist. What we'll do now is we'll talk through the OCR mark schemes and we'll look at what they are expecting from us so we can then do that in the exam and secure the top marks. So let's start with the requirements for AO1. And of course, we are aiming for level 6, which is the top level. And remember, AO1 is all about knowledge and understanding. So what do we actually need to do in order to secure level 6? Well, this is what OCR say, and they use the word excellent to describe a level 6 essay. So they say it needs to be an excellent attempt to address the question, showing understanding and engagement with the material. There needs to be excellent ability to select and deploy relevant information. I think the word relevant is very important there. Remember, you've got to be answering the exact question. And sometimes I think it's just as important to think about what you're going to leave out as you need to think about what you are going to include. Because if something isn't relevant, don't just include it for the sake of it. Make sure every scholar you refer to is linked to the exact question you're answering. There needs to be extensive ranges of scholarly views. You need to use different scholars, academic approaches, and or sources of wisdom and authority, which all demonstrate knowledge and understanding. So what does all of this mean in terms of your actual mark? Well, as we know, in order to secure an A star, we need to be in level 6, don't we? So we need to be getting for our AO1 marks 14, 15, or 16 out of 16 for AO1. So that means we need to have an excellent demonstration of knowledge and understanding in response to the question. So these are the things our examiner will be looking for. They need to feel confident that you fully comprehended the demands of and focused on the question throughout. So remember, you need to be fully focused on that exact question throughout. And that's why you need to use the language of the question throughout your answer, and you need to be referring back to the question throughout your answer. There needs to be an excellent selection of relevant material, which is skillfully used. And as I said before, the keyword there really is relevant. Everything that you are including needs to be relevant to the question that you are answering. Don't just bring in scholars for the sake of it. Don't just talk about everything you know for that topic. Make sure you're being really selective in terms of which scholars you're using, and that you're being really explicit in linking them back to the question. There needs to be accurate and highly detailed knowledge. So that is going to be evidenced by using examples and also, of course, using quotes, which demonstrates deep understanding through a complex and nuanced approach to the material used. And all that means very simply is that you are explaining what the scholars have said. So with your AO1, it's all about your explanations. It's all about showing the examiner you understand what Aristotle meant, you understand what James was saying. There needs to be thorough, accurate, and precise use of technical terms and vocabulary in context. So make sure you're using your correct terminology. And there needs to be an extensive range of scholarly views, academic approaches, and or sources of wisdom and authority that demonstrate knowledge and understanding. So all that is saying is don't just keep referring to the same scholar throughout your essay. Make sure you have got different scholars who are saying different things. But of course, remember, bringing them in means you are going to make them relevant to that question you are answering. So let's break it down into the 5 things you need to show in order to get your level 6 in terms of AO1. You need to show an excellent ability to address the question, so you are answering the exact question. You need to show excellent understanding and engagement with the material, so you're going to be referring to different sources and you're going to be explaining their relevance. You need to show excellent selection and deployment of the material. So remember, sometimes less is more. Don't just write about everything you know. Make sure it's all relevant to the exact question you're answering. There needs to be an excellent range of scholarly views and academic resources. And then 5, show excellent understanding. And again, that is going to be evidenced by your explanations, by your use of examples, and where you are linking scholars back to the question. What about AO2 then? Let's talk through what we need to do for a level 6 in terms of our AO2. And remember, AO2 is all about evaluation and analysis. So we need to show an excellent demonstration of analysis and evaluation in response to the question. We need to be confident and insightful. I'm going to highlight those 2 words. You need to get off the fence and you need to be making those judgments. And it needs to be confident and insightful, critical analysis and detailed evaluation of the issue. Views skillfully and carefully stated, coherently developed and justified. Excellent line of reasoning, well sustained and developed, which is coherent, relevant and logically structured. So coherent means it all makes sense. Relevant means that it is completely focused on the question. Please do excuse my terrible highlighting, by the way. That is definitely not level 6 highlighting. And logically structured. And the key word I would be using here is plan. You need to plan your essay before you start writing it, because we want it to flow. You want to take your reader on a journey. You want to guide your examiner to your conclusion. So it needs to be coherent, it needs to be clear, it needs to be relevant, which means it's answering the exact question, and it needs to be logically structured, which means you need to put some thought into your planning. You need to say, right, I'm going to start with a thesis and then going to do an agree, disagree, conclude, for example. Let's have a look at the actual mark scheme then, shall we? So again, for our level 6, that means for AO2, we need to be getting a minimum of 21 out of 24, and we need to be producing an excellent response. So we need to show an excellent demonstration of analysis and evaluation in response to the question. What does that mean? Well, there needs to be excellent, clear and successful argument. There needs to be confident and insightful critical analysis and detailed evaluation of the issue. Views need to be skillfully and clearly stated, coherently developed and justified. You need to answer the question set precisely throughout. So again, it's about this relevance. You've got to answer the exact question. Don't just start going off on a tangent. Make sure everything is really focused on answering the question. We want thorough, accurate and precise use of technical terms and vocabulary, again, and then of course extensive range of scholarly views, academic approaches and sources of wisdom and authority used to support analysis and evaluation. And what that means is, don't just say, this is what James said, or this is what the Bible teaches. You then need to make that judgment, and you then need to make it relevant to the argument. So you've got to then get off the fence, make that judgment and explain it in a way that links back to the question. And then please always remember the assessment of extended response. You need to show an excellent line of reasoning, well developed and sustained, which is coherent, relevant and logically structured. So that just refers to the fact we've got to make sure we're being clear, we've got to make sure everything is focused on the question, and that we've planned our essay before we've started writing it. So what does this all mean? Well, as we say, AO2 is about evaluation and analysis. So we want to show an excellent line of argument. Your examiner cannot be shocked by your conclusion. They've got to feel very confident that you have guided them to that conclusion. So you can't be really, really critical about something, you know, throughout your whole essay, and then in the conclusion, suddenly change your mind. It's got to start with that thesis statement, and you're then taking the examiner on a journey to your conclusion. We want to see excellent critical analysis. You're not just presenting arguments from scholars, you're actually engaging with them. You've got to make those judgments. This is fatally flawed. This is a strong argument. This is convincing. This is clear. This is well justified. This is further supported by another scholar. So make sure you're making judgments. We need to see excellent and extensive use of scholarly views. So remember, you're not just going to write what you think, you've got to evidence it with scholars. You've got to refer to their text. You've got to refer to what they've said. Make sure you're using scholars in every single paragraph. There needs to be that excellent focus on the question. Again, it's all about being really relevant and really clear. And then finally, excellent use of your technical terms and vocabulary. Now, here's my top tip when it comes to starting every essay. I always advise that you start with your thesis. So you read the question, and then the first thing you've got to think of is, obviously, which scholars am I going to include? That's very important. But also, what will my thesis be? And a thesis is very clearly, very simply, one sentence which sums up what you are trying to establish as your conclusion. And this is something that you will do when you go on to the top universities in this country to study this subject. You will start your essays with a thesis. So you will say at the start, this essay will conclude that. And then you need to make a judgment as to whether your essay is going to be agreeing or disagreeing with the question. So you need to include your thesis statement in your introduction. You need to refer back to it during your essay and then fully justify it in your conclusion. So my top tip here is that when you see an essay title, make sure you practice constructing your thesis statement. So what would your conclusion be? What judgment would you be reaching? We want to get into the habit of very quickly coming up with a thesis statement that we can then construct an essay around, because then in the exam room, no matter what question we get, we're going to feel really confident about writing an A-star essay. And I always like to visualize this as a journey or as a road, because we are guiding our examiner through our essay. We don't want it to be disjointed. We don't want them to be really surprised by the conclusion. We want to start with a clear thesis statement as part of our introduction, and then we're going to guide them on a journey to our conclusion. And we're going to present to them and analyze for them different arguments on both sides, but we are ultimately going to reach our clear conclusion that is linked to the introduction. So your thesis statement is like your golden thread that is going to run throughout your essay, because you're going to start with that very clear thesis statement, and you're then going to conclude by fully explaining how you've got there. And so, as I say, I would always see these essays as a journey. Now, that's not to say they're going to be one-sided. Remember, you cannot just give one side of the argument, but when you are giving different views, you need to be linking them to your line of argument. So whenever you bring in a scholar, you need to tell me, are they right or are they wrong in what they are saying? Don't just present them as if you were writing an encyclopedia for people to flick through. Make sure you are engaging with them. Imagine that you've got the scholars in a room with you and you're telling them what you think of their arguments. You're actually making judgments as to whether they're right or wrong, and whether they've been helpful on your journey to arriving at that conclusion. So the last thing I want to say is you can download this PowerPoint. The link is below, and you can also download the A-star phrases sheet, which might be helpful for you in developing your A-star essays. So the link for all of that is down below. But thank you very much for joining me. I do hope that's been helpful, and good luck with your studies.